Welcome, everyone. I am so pleased that you can join us tonight. I am Amy Weiss, and on behalf of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Education at St. Elizabeth University, I welcome you tonight to a discussion with Peter Balakian. Before we begin and hear from Peter Balakian, I would like to introduce our co-sponsor, and that is Drew University's Center for Holocaust and Genocide Study. And on behalf of the center, I'd like to welcome Angela West.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Amy mentioned, I am the coordinator at the Center for Holocaust Genocide Study at Drew University. And it is our pleasure to be a co-sponsor for tonight's event with Peter Balakian. Given that our semester is coming to an end, normally I would share our lovely spring programs with you, but we have completed them. That being said, I will put a link to our events webpage in the chat, and please bookmark it, because come as early August 2021, we will start announcing our fall semester events that you are all welcome to attend. And with that, I'll give it back to you, Amy.
Thank you. So now I'd like to officially welcome Peter Balakian to our Armenian genocide commemoration for tonight, that each year St. Elizabeth University holds an annual commemoration. And we're so pleased that this year Peter Balakian is joining us. And I think especially during this moment that the annual commemoration of the Armenian genocide takes place every year on April 24th. And this year in the United States, we had President Biden recognize officially, talking about what happened in 1915 and 1916, recognizing it as a genocide. So I think this is a really great opportunity to hear about the Armenian genocide and the modern age. And Peter recently, just in the past few days, has had an op-ed in the Washington Post and has been on NPR. So perhaps you've seen it. If you haven't, definitely check it out. In introducing Peter, he's a Pulitzer Prize winner and the author of 7 books of poems, 4 books of prose, and 2 translations. His poems have been critically acclaimed in the US and abroad for over 4 decades. Balakian's highly acclaimed memoir, Black Dog of Fate, received the Penn Albrand Prize for Memoir and was a New York Times notable book. The Burning Tigress, The Armenian Genocide and America's Response, received the 2005 Raphael Lumpkin Prize and was a New York Times and national bestseller, as well as a New York Times notable book. His co-translation of Grigoris Balakian's Armenian Golgotha, a memoir of the Armenian Genocide, was a Washington Post Book of the Year. He has taught at Colgate University since 1980, where he is currently Donald M. and Constance H. Rebar Professor of the Humanities in the Department of English and Director of Creative Writing. He was the first director of Colgate Center for Ethics and World Societies. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Peter Balakian.
Amy and Angela, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and be back in my home state of NJ. And I'm glad to know that your Holocaust and Genocide Studies centers come together as they do to do some commemorative event on this April 24 moment. And it is let's face it, it's an interesting and historic moment with President Biden's statement, and we can talk more about that during our Q&A. So let's talk a bit about the Armenian genocide in history, in historical context. And I want to situate the event in the second decade of the 20th century first. And I want to sketch very briefly a kind of social and political portrait of the second decade of the 20th century, because for those of us in the humanities and in literary studies in particular, second decade of the 20th century is a time of extraordinary excitement and innovation, right? We have the new, we have the new psychology and the emergence of Freud. We have the new theater. We have the new dance. Isadora Duncan embodies that. We have new atonal modernist music. Think of Stravinsky. We have all the new experiments in literature, right? Think of Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, Faulkner, Virginia Woolf. We have the new art, the whole new revolution in visual art. Think of Cubism, think of Picasso, think of Wang Gris, think of Braque, think of Marcel Duchamp and Dadaism. We have the emergence of the first wave of feminism. The suffrage movement has come into fruition. The 1918 election has brought us the amendment to bring women the vote. It's the new woman. We have a new liberalism with Woodrow Wilsonian progressivism. We have a new journalism. It's a decade that's become tagged by innovation and change, right? In culture and the humanities, certainly in Europe and in North America. We also have, again, this is just basics, fundamentals, but I want to pit the Armenian genocide in the context and against these dominant forces. I mean, think of the technological change that comes to some fruition in the second decade of the 20th century. Cinema. The movies start, right? Radio. Popular music is born out of radio and the Victrola, the record player, the record, the LP, the first thick plastic discs to go on the wheel. Electric lights begin to change what urbanization means. The automobile is soon to become a car, an item for middle-class people, not quite in the teens, but it's on its way. The telephone, and the extraordinary dimensions of transformation that go into the excitement of change and innovation that mark the second decade of the 20th century, right? Along with this, and this always reminds us that history is dialectical and paradoxical, along with this comes the malignancy of modernity. And first, I think that's inseparable from what was known as the Great War, the first technological war, the war that took over 10 million lives, the war that destroyed the cohorts and generations of whole countries, Great Britain, France, Germany, Russia. The boys and men of those generations, 18 to 30, were in some cases just decimated. War fought with biological weapons, war fought with automatic rifles and guns, war fought with tanks, war fought a bit with planes, early aerial bombing and planes in World War I. All of this morphs into a grotesque inversion of modern innovation and change, because the very apparatus of technology that's given us those wonderments of modernity in urban industrialization have also contributed to the war that would change the world forever. We will never return to a pre-World War I moment. And I mean, you go from wars that were being fought like soccer matches to wars that could take the lives of 60,000 soldiers in a day, say at the Somme in 1916. And then congruent with World War I is genocide, for the first time practiced in a modern modality. And I want to emphasize, and we're going to talk about what it means to practice genocide in a modern modality, which is congruent with the first modern technological war. Not necessarily do I mean to suggest that the extermination of the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire was practiced the same way that World War I was practiced on the Western Front, but it's part of the same concept and the same cultural and political moment. And so World War I can't be understood fully without understanding how genocide was practiced in a modern mode by the Ottoman Turkish government in 1915. And it's one of the points that you all know, but I want to underscore for those of you who are educators and who are involved in the making of curricula and so on, that teaching World War I means teaching the Armenian genocide in the way that teaching World War II means teaching the Holocaust. These two events are inseparable from their war environments and their total war ambiances. I want to come back to the modernity idea in a couple minutes. I want to continue to frame the Armenian genocide in its historical landmark dimensions by noting the responses it elicited from major voices of the early part of the 20th century. First, the Allies, France, Great Britain, and Russia, sent the Ottoman ruling elite, meaning the Committee of Union and Progress Triumvirate, Talat, Enver, and Jamal, Nazim, Shakir, and their group, a telegram in May of 1915, in which the Allies wrote, if the massacres of the Armenians continue, Turkey will be held responsible for crimes against humanity and civilization. That was the phrase. Now it's become a very important phrase in international human rights and international law. It was coined in response to the Armenian massacres as early as May of 1915. Okay, the killing had just begun. I always like to note that Theodore Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, who was not in office in 1915 to 18, did write at the end of the war that the Armenian massacres were the greatest crime of the war. Secondly, I think it's important to note that the term Armenian genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin, the Polish Jewish legal scholar who coined the notion of genocide as a crime in international law, who theorized it and became the father of the 1948 UN Genocide Convention. Lemkin's Law, as you may know it. It was Lemkin, the term Armenian genocide did not come out of Armenian culture or Armenian rhetoric. It was coined by Lemkin in the early 1940s. And it was Lemkin who went on television in February of 1949 saying to the CBS interviewer, he said, well, I got interested in genocide because it happened so many times before. He said, first, it happened to the Armenians, and they got a raw deal at the Versailles Treaty because the perpetrators, the Turkish criminals, were let go. And then Lemkin went on to talk about the Solomon Tellurian assassination of Talat, which Lemkin referred to as a beautiful crime. You may know this. He referred to Tellurian's assassination of Talat as a beautiful crime. He saw it as a justice crime, but he also didn't think this was the way to do international law or prosecution or punishment for human rights crimes. And it was in the wake of the Tolerian trial in Berlin. And it was after the unveiling of the Armenian massacres, and Lemkin writes, I read in the papers that 1.2 Armenians were massacred by in Turkey. That's how he put it. This started to catapult him to career change. He started arguing with his law professors at the University of Lvov and interrogating them. Well, why is it okay to be charged for murder if one man murders another man? And how can it be that if a nation murders over 1 million people, it's not a crime? So this, the Armenian event, and Lemkin's deep experience as a Jew growing up in Eastern Poland and being surrounded by pogroms and anti-Semitism, began to lead Lemkin toward his career as a human rights lawyer. So I think it's important that we understand the impact of the Armenian genocide on Lemkin. If we talk about the angelic consciousness of the early part of the 20th century, then we also want to note the demonic and satanic one, Adolf Hitler, who mentioned the Armenian genocide more than a couple of times in his early career. He learned something from it. He got emboldened. He picked up some tactics, and he did say 8 days before invading Poland in August of 1939, who today, after all, speaks of the annihilation of the Armenians. He was talking to his military advisors. And, you know, Lemkin, Hitler's statement reminds us that collective historical memory has a moral function to play in how we understand the making of a human society in any time. History matters, and moral memory matters. There's a lot more to say, of course, about both Hitler and Lemkin, but let me move on. So I want to set those up for you as what I call modernity landmarks, and they need always to be part of how we contextualize and think about this groundbreaking history. Now, my definition in shorthand here today, as we talk about what genocide in a modern modality means. The targeting, and of course, I want to say the obvious, genocide is an ancient practice. We find histories of genocide among the ancient Greeks, in the histories of the ancient Hebrews and the Levantine cultures in antiquity. We find genocide practiced in early medieval Europe, genocide practiced by the Catholic Church against the Albigensians in the 16th century. We find many histories of genocide. Genocide is much more normative than many of us think. The practice of Nazi genocide is one of many. And I think it's important for us as Americans to come to terms with our own genocidal history against many Native American cultures and peoples, and in various dimensions of white supremacist slave-holding culture, Jim Crow culture, and systemic racism. Genocide is part of the American story, and we don't want to pretend it's not. However, genocide practiced in a modern modality, the targeting of an ethnic group for elimination in a concentrated period of time by a government that uses the following: its bureaucracy, its most advanced technology and communications, a nationalist ideology, its governmental legislative branches. Again, to eliminate a targeted collectivity, Raphael Lemkin's term, in this case, an ethnic group, a religious ethnic group. This group happened to be Christian, Armenian Christians, in a concentrated period of time. I feel important. It's important to underscore, that before it was all over, another 2 million Greek and Assyrian Christians were liquidated, and the whole event begins to encompass the genocidal extermination of 4 million Christians, 3 indigenous Anatolian Christian cultures from Turkey. And this is very much part of Turkey's modern nation formation, right? This is what we see as a practice. Nations, and the US is among them. Nation formation involves the elimination of ethnic groups who are perceived to be in the way. Now, let me come back to, I should share my screen with you in a second. I'll share it with you in a second. Remind me to, I have some images. Let's just talk about the modernity infrastructure. And let me also acknowledge that for 25 or 30 years, from the mid to late 1880s, right through the eve of World War I, Armenian communities, not all of them, but Armenian political communities were pushing the envelope in the Ottoman Empire. Armenian political leaders were asking for change. And it was pretty radical for a minority group, a Christian minority group, to be asking for reform and change in an Islamic, theocratic, autocratic society. And this has to be understood. I liken the Armenian movement to a kind of a proto-modern civil rights movement. The most salient part of the movement was to demand reform of the Ottoman constitution for inclusivity of minorities and the application of constitutional rights for all minorities in the empire, Jews, Arabs, because not all Muslims had equal rights, Jews, Arabs, Christians. And so I don't have time to do a lecture on that history, the history of tensions and explosions between Armenian protests for constitutional change and the putative response of massacre, first during the Sultan Abdul Hamid II reign, during which time the Hamidai, the Sultan's private army, mass murdered over 100,000 Armenian citizens in the mid-1890s. Many of you know the history of the Hamidian massacres. And we see the eruption of a massacre in Adana in 1909. And these are whole lectures. I'll be happy to come back and give them, but tonight I want to move on to the issue of the modernity infrastructure. First, I mentioned that the nation state used its bureaucracy skillfully to execute the plan, a final solution for the ridding of the Armenian population of Ottoman Turkey behind the screen of World War I. Wartime is often a classic exploitation time for genocideers for many reasons. You know, the arming, the society is armed, sedition is easy to claim, issues of loyalty, marginalize and target othered ethnic groups. There is chaos and confusion vis-a-vis the outside world. So during World War I, the Ottoman Ministry of the Interior created its SO. My Turkish isn't good, Teşkilatı Maşuşa, the special organization, the SO. And while Talat oversaw this, it was Bedahin Shakir who really administered it. And it was the SO that conscripted 3,000 men into killing squads, finding most of the killing manpower from the prisons. And these guys were released from prison and harnessed into something a little bit like what the Nazis called their Einsatzgruppen. Before the mass incinerating happened in the camps, the Einsatzgruppen, the killing squads, were doing a lot of killing by hand. Well, in the Armenian genocide, the killing was all done by hand. There was no high-tech killing. And it was gruesome hand-done killing, often with butcher tools, tannery equipment, farm tools. It was a slaughterhouse, as U.S. Consul Leslie Davis called it, a slaughterhouse. So we've got the SO working under the Ministry of the Interior. We have 30,000, if I said 3,000, I'm sorry, 30,000 killing squad operation being mobilized. Then there is the use of parliament. So you're using your legislative branches, in this case, to pass two essential laws that legitimated the deportation and massacre of the Armenian people throughout Ottoman Turkey, and then the confiscation and expropriation of all of their movable and immovable wealth. May 1915, the temporary law of deportation. September 1915, the temporary law of confiscation and expropriation. Third, I mentioned advanced technology and communications. There's a lot of evidence now, and I've reproduced some of these photos in a couple of my books, that the CUP, the Committee of Union and Progress, used the railway to deport sizable numbers of Armenians from the western part of Turkey to the south and the east. Secondly, and the boxcars became, I'm going to show you some, I think I have them in my PowerPoint. And the boxcars became obviously, death traps. People died of starvation and famine, and so on. Secondly, Talat and his assistants used the telegraph ingeniously to send killing squad orders all over the country. I mean, it may seem quaint to us now, but the telegraph was kind of like a hip new MacBook Air. And you could, communicate magic in minutes to people hundreds of miles away. So the telegraph is very important to the Armenian genocide, just the way the radio is very important in the Rwandan genocide. And in some way, the Nazis appropriated so much technology and communications for their genocide plans, but we see it happening here. I want to mention ideology because words matter and ideas are powerful. And so the pan-Turkic ideology that Ziya Gökalp was kind of the mastermind of in the second decade of the 20th century in Ottoman Turkey. Inculcated, purported, disseminated the idea that Turkey could only return to its vitality and health if it got rid of non-Turkic elements. Turkey for the Turks. Pan-Turkism. There's a lot to read in pan-Turkic ideology. There are a lot of books about pan-Turkism that you can find in English. And it reminds us of features of Nazi race superiority, though it's not a biomedical vision of that sort, but it is about ethnic homogeneity and the need to exterminate as various members of the Ottoman bureaucracy, some of them physicians, referred to Armenians as filthy microbes that had to be flushed out. Again, words matter, images matter, metaphors matter. So ideology is important here. Town by town, city by city, village by village. In the spring and summer and fall of 1915, Armenians were deported, massacred, eliminated, driven into exile if they survived through this infrastructure. And let's focus on the event that we commemorate on April 24. The event, of course, the whole event, the genocide of the Armenians in Ottoman Turkey, but the particular April 24 arrests of the 250 or so cultural and intellectual leaders in Turkey, in the capital of the Ottoman Empire, Constantinople, now Istanbul, on the night of April 24. And again, this just illustrates the fine-tuning of the bureaucracy, that you ferreted out all of these people, poets, fiction writers, journalists, teachers, clergy, philanthropists, benefactors of culture, newspaper owners, all these people, you knew where they were, you knew where to arrest them, you gathered them in the central prison in downtown Constantinople, and you would start deporting them by ferry, by bus and ferry and train the next day. And this is brilliantly depicted in my great uncle Grigorios Balakian's memoir, Armenian Golgotha, chapters 6 and 7, really quite riveting. So what do we learn from that in terms of organization? We learned that the perpetrators understand that it's important to cut the voice out.
¿Por qué no se escucha nada acá?
Of the culture. It's important
Bueno,
to
yo no escucho nada.
hung out and to silence it first. Okay,
Se me pone en mute solo.
we get somebody to mute there.
Ah, pero ya lo encontraste.
Sí.
No, mute es una cosa.
Can you mute, please? Thank you. Okay. All right. Let me go for a few minutes to share my screen with you. You got my last point about cutting the head off of the culture by silencing the intellectuals. Very important, April 24. Let me share the screen with you for 5 minutes and then let's open it to questions. So let's share it. Okay. I'm trying to admit somebody in the waiting room. Okay, good. I don't need to do, I have a feeling from looking at my audience, I don't need to do a lot with this map, that many in the audience understand the historical epochs of this map. So I'm going to move on. Okay. I often find it interesting to look at Armenian Armenian cities like the Armenian quarter of Harpert in the late 19th century, to see Armenian towns and quarters built out of the rocky highlands of East Central Anatolia in this case. Always kind of important to have some sense of who the perpetrators were. I mentioned Talat Pasha, who was assassinated by Solomon Tellurian in March of 1920 in Berlin. Enver, who was also taken down fighting in Afghanistan after World War I. An image of Raphael Lemkin is always moving to see. I refer to him as one of the angelic voices of the 20th century, the brilliant human rights lawyer who gave his life for the concept of genocide. And what I mean by gave his life is, and he didn't kill himself, but he put himself into poverty, pursuing this mission and dying at an unnecessarily young age. That's a longer story. This is from the Hieronyk Weekly. Dr. Lemkin, father of the Genocide Convention, reviews work relating to Turkish massacres, and this is from 1959. More on Lemkin. One of the significant events in the morphology of the Armenian liquidation plan was the arrest of all the able-bodied Armenian men in the Ottoman army on grounds that they were untrustworthy, and then the rounding them up into labor battalions and massacring them, so that the Turkish and Kurdish soldiers massacred the Armenian labor battalion soldiers en masse. By the summer of 1915, there weren't many able-bodied Armenian men left. Some of the intellectuals arrested on the night of April 24, Krikor Zorab, Daniel Varujan, they were all killed that summer. Well, you know, this map of the killing fields doesn't even show you Western Turkey, and a lot of killing went on in Çankırı, in Ankara, in Adana. I mean, a lot of killing went on in the West too, but you can see where most of it went on, and you see the epicenter of killing in Deir Zor in the northern Syrian desert, and big, huge killing centers in Lake Van, Bitlis, Mush region, and then in Sivas. An important image because it shows us the infrastructure of modern state bureaucracy at work. Armenian men here being marched out of Harpert to their deaths, May 1915, taken by somebody at the US consulate. There are guesses about who snapped this photo, but it comes from the second terrorist in the consulate. Those boxcars I was mentioning, here we see Armenians being deported by the Berlin to Baghdad Railway. Executions in public squares. women being deported, straggling with their children. We have to remember that one big part of genocidal killing is the abduction and rape of women. More than 200,000 Armenian women were abducted into Turkish and Kurdish families and basically robbed. They were stolen into the perpetrator culture. Their identities were extinguished. And the same with the children who were robbed and abducted into perpetrator family and family infrastructure. So a sizable piece of the Armenian population was genocidal that way. And today, as we know, a lot of people in Turkey have Armenian ancestors. Camps in the Syrian desert, much to say about that. The face of genocide is a universal face, sadly, in the 20th century, whether it be in Rwanda, in Poland or Germany, in Cambodia. I'm going to stop here. There's a famous telegram from Ambassador Morgenthau, and he puts it so eloquently, and I will stop here. Reports of eyewitnesses, it appears that a campaign of race extermination is in progress under a pretext of reprisal against rebellion. It couldn't be said better. And there's our distinguished and important witness to the Armenian genocide, Ambassador Henry Morgenthau. I'm going to leave the screen. And thank you very much. And I want to open the floor for conversation.
Peter, thank you so much. This was fantastic. I especially appreciated your contextualization of the genocide, of highlighting the idea that what was going on in the 1910s in terms of culture, in terms of what was happening. And I think that's really important. And just some of the statements that you made, words matter, images matter. I think really useful to hear that, and especially your comments for those teachers who are in the audience. This idea of when you think about teaching World War I, what does that mean? When you think about World War II, this idea of teaching about genocide goes hand in hand. So I really appreciate that. So thank you so much. And we have a flurry of comments, both that came in by email and in the chat. So I will start right away. So one question that came from Lori Kazanjian: the most powerful and lasting memory of many Armenians of the diaspora is the imprint of genocide. How have you discovered the richness beyond the genocide? Music, art, history, other advancements?
Yeah, always important to remind ourselves as various communities. There are many Armenian communities across the globe, and these communities are all welded by certain common historical experiences and common other grounds, from the kitchen and the recipe book to chants and songs and church service and so forth. But look, I want to just flash back to the fall of 2018, when if all of you, I hope you did, had a chance to drive down Fifth Avenue to 81st Street to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and see that lovely purple pennant banner hanging off the side of the Met with the word Armenia on it, to announce the exhibit of Armenian art, architecture, and medieval Armenian, mostly Christian liturgical artifacts. It was an extraordinary show, and it was just the tip of the iceberg. many non-Armenians and probably Armenians as well came face to face with a kind of depth and richness of Armenian artistic and architectural traditions. Look, there are not that many. I haven't done the empirical stats on this, but certainly Armenia remains one of the most ancient civilizations that has maintained continuity across 2 millennia, has survived massacre, genocide, war, has been a large empire for periods in antiquity, has had a strong medieval presence, both in Ani and in Kilikia. And the complexity and richness of the Armenian imagination is really historically important. It's a significant contribution to the international tapestry, isn't it? From frescoes and khatchkars to early Christian churches into the late and then high medieval period. I don't want to forget the long tradition of literary culture and literature, poets, later fiction writers and nonfiction writers, playwrights in the modern era. A really interesting Armenian diasporan culture and Armenian Republic and Soviet Armenian culture of literary artists. So this is, a tradition to feast on. And I'm just scratching the surface in a very quick answer to you. Much to say about it, but.
Thank you. And we also have a question, and this is something that you touched upon briefly, but Catherine Brown is asking about the 1895-96 slaughter of Armenians and how that's not generally acknowledged as part of the Armenian genocide. She says, my great-grandparents were victims of their aggression. Could you comment on that historical period and perhaps why that slaughter or that act of aggression is not particularly part of the 1915-1916 genocide?
Yeah, it's a good point, important point, and I think you can't separate the Hamidian massacres from the 1915 explosion. Historians might want to say, some historians might say, it wasn't systematic race extermination plan, and it wasn't. It was putative. Abdul Hamid wanted to smash the Armenian communities into terror and submission so that there would be no more agitation for change. So it was putative. However, I use the social psychologist Irvin Staub's term, genocides progress along a continuum of destruction. And they're the result of long brewing cofactors. And in the cofactor contextual continuum of destruction that leads to the explosion of 1915, 1894 to 96 and beyond is essential because it's during this period that the targeted group is dehumanized in a violent way. And, this is parallels to this with Jews in Germany, and especially in Nazi Germany. The devaluation, the disenfranchisement of the ethnic group by the Nuremberg laws, the stripping of Jews of their professorships, of their place in the medical profession, of their citizenship, makes them much easier for ordinary Germans to participate in their genocidal elimination. Okay, so, and I think that's the case in the Hamidian massacres, that they are an essential component on the road of continuum destruction, in which devaluation and protracted violence has been legitimized. So that's how I would put it.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Nick Mumajian. Do you see avenues or possibilities for dialogue between Armenians and Turks, and specifically with groups such as Hizmet or other aspects of either the Gulen or Nursi movements?
Well, I start by noting that, my own work with my Turkish friends and colleagues has been immensely rewarding. Some of the most brave and wonderful people in my communities of scholars and friendships. Some of them are in prison today. Others are in exile. My Turkish publisher, Ragip Zarakolu, one of the bravest people I'll ever know, deserves the Nobel Prize for Peace Prize. Is living in Stockholm. He'll never return to Turkey. The tragedy of Osman Kavala being in prison right now is something I only mention in passing, but could spend much time on. So we have extraordinary allies on the ground inside Turkey as well, who care very much about the truth of this history and the truth of other histories, because they are working for democracy in their own society. And right now they're up against a stone wall, because Turkey is in a totalitarian freeze with Erdogan's recent years of backlash and repression. So I think that we have to keep cultivating dialogue with our Turkish allies. We have to know who they are and cultivate dialogue with them. I don't know what to say about the Gulen project. I really don't know. I don't know enough. I was once going to give a lecture to a Gulen group, and something happened, didn't work out. So I have to defer to others who have more knowledge of the Gulen group and get their take on whether this is a possible avenue of conversation. But I do think that one never knows when the pieces of a political moment are going to shift or change. And therefore, the pursuit of justice, which is what the Armenian communities around the world are engaged in, the pursuit of justice simply has to be ongoing. And change happens. And lots of frustration happens along the way, and rage and anger, especially as one confronts the perniciousness and cruelty and immorality of Turkish state-sponsored denialism and the continued blaming of the victims in an effort to rehabilitate themselves, the perpetrators. Even with all that, change happens. So I think people should pursue avenues of conversation as they find them.
Another question is, have you studied or do you have any interest in studying the lasting collective psychological trauma of a people as a result of denial by Turkey?
So the lasting collective trauma of a people, meaning the Armenian ethnic group and community?
Yes, I believe so.
Well,
how has denial, are you interested in studying the impact of denial?
I mean, I certainly have spent a decent amount of my time studying the impact of denial and writing about it. And so who's ever asking me that question, I guess I would turn you to the last chapters of my memoir, Black Dog of Fate, where I explore that, the impact of denial. And then even my op-ed of last weekend in the Washington Post is about that. more, I mean, half the piece deals with that. So go there and tell me, I hope it's useful. But yeah, I'm always studying that. I mean, I have a lot of pans on my stove that are simmering various things, but I have spent a significant amount of time exploring the harshness and damage and wounding that denialism has on the legacy communities, all of our legacy communities.
Thank you. And then we have a couple of comments or questions about the recent war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And what do you make of this? Or that I should say, that's me paraphrasing. John was asking, is that a wish of the Turkish people to continue massacring Armenians?
Again, that's a whole subject for another lecture and session. What a couple of the large bullet points to make, perhaps for me, we're staring in the face the violent cruelty of two neighbors, both who have been, especially the neighbor to the west, who have been genocidal perpetrators, Turkey and its cohort nation, Azerbaijan, to the east of Armenia, were scissored here by a historical adversary that's reemerging. And the Turkish invasion of the Caucasus brings the Armenian Republic to an existential confrontation. So the events of the fall of 2020 are deeply troubling and alarming. Armenia, the Republic of Armenia, needs the support of its powerful nation allies. The Republic needs its support. President Biden's statement of April 24, 5 days ago, is important because it continues to strengthen the world's response and understanding to the precariousness of the Republic of Armenia. In some way, it implies that the precariousness of Armenia in the South Caucasus. And so Armenia needs its allies to back it, affirm it, and to understand its history. Because without understanding the history of the Armenian genocide, you can't understand the violence done to Armenia in the Karabakh War of 2020.
Thank you. And we have another question about Turkish officials have said that they're willing to open their archives. And what is your response to prove that about what happened in 1915, 1916? Is that true? Do you agree with that? How do you respond? The opening of the archives, or is that happening?
You mean to prove that Turkey is innocent? Is that the idea?
I'm not sure. Right. I think that might be the implication there, to come check out what we have to find out what actually happened.
Well, there are three fundamental things to note, and they've been noted for a long time. And I'm reiterating something that is well known in the scholarly community. One, successive Turkish regimes have done everything they can to cleanse the archives. They've destroyed probably millions of documents. Two, one Turkish historian who spoke to your center earlier this year, Taner Akçam, has had a field day using the archives of the Ministry of the Interior to demonstrate and explain the precision of Turkish bureaucratic planning for the elimination of the Armenians. So both of those things make clear the absurdity of the claims that come and see our archives, you'll find we're guiltless. It's not the case. Keep using them, because the more Western scholars can get in there, the more gold nuggets are revealed about the planning and the conceptualizing. As you well know, Tanner has focused on the demographic planning, the population, the obsession with how to get rid of Armenian populations.
Thank you for that. And we also have another question. You had mentioned that one of the other talks that you give is about the international response, or particularly the American response. So Katarina's asking, can you speak to international response, or perhaps lack thereof, especially the US? And she's also asking, have you read The Great Fire by Lou Oranek about Asa Jennings, a Methodist minister who helped evacuate thousands without government help?
I haven't read that last book, no. I would just, again, it is another lecture, but the US response to the Armenian crisis in the Ottoman Empire starting in the mid-1990s is an extraordinary history. It's half the book I wrote. It's half of my book, The Burning Tigris. Well, it's more than half. It's probably it's most of the book. You know, it's 80% of that book. So I send you there to read about it. And the response to relief and rescue programs for the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire came from grassroots, corporate executives, and cultural and intellectual leaders at huge sums of money, and some quite heroic intervention. I've made the point again and again in The Burning Tigris that Clara Barton took the first Red Cross mission ever in the US history out of the country when she took those teams to Eastern Turkey in 1896 to do rescue and relief work of the Armenian populations there. You know, anywhere from Harpert east after the Abdulhamid massacres. So it's a rich story.
You've mentioned the April 24th statement of President Biden recognizing what happened as a genocide. And so a couple other questions about what, if any, impact will that have? Will it make a difference? Will there be repercussions? And how might that also impact Armenian Americans? How might that impact curriculum? So this is melding together several questions that have come in about that, what has happened in the past week.
Yeah, I think there are significant impacts. Number one is it should really put a total nail in the coffin to Turkish efforts to harass and interfere, and interfere and censor the representation of the Armenian genocide in any US forum. So it's not going to be a problem. You know, we're not going to see anybody answering the phone when the Turkish consul general calls to say, oh, you can't have an event about the Armenian genocide at the Clara Barton Memorial on the Mall. That won't happen, shouldn't happen. So it kind of completely marginalizes Turkish denial to Turkey. You know, I mean, the fact is that the US is, I want to say two things. Number one, the United States did its acknowledgement resolution in the fall of 2019, when the House and the Senate passed those resolutions nearly unanimously. That's really the main thing. All the other 30 countries who've done this have done it through their legislative bodies. Heads of state, you know, come and go. Now, it's great that President Biden did this because it adds extra muscle to it. It's a redress to Turkey's unethical pursuit of absolution and impunity. And that's good, that's important. It has a symbolic meaning and it has a world leadership meaning to it. So I think that's important, the symbolic meaning. And I think continuing to marginalize Turkish denialism, to make Turkish denialism a pariah is necessary, and Biden's statement does that. So I think those are good takeaways.
Thank you. I think that's those are important points to think about moving forward in terms of what happens next. And I'm conscious of the time, and I think we've gone through several questions. So I think we'll stop here. And Peter, I wanted to thank you again so much for your talk, the information that you have shared with us, and also for the work that you've done on this topic. I just wanted to thank you. And on behalf of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Education at St. Elizabeth University and the Center for Holocaust Genocide Study at Drew University, thank you so much. And to everyone in attendance, thank you for coming, and please stay tuned for fall programming, and we will see you soon. Peter Balakian, thank you so much.
Amy and Angela, thank you. And audience, thanks for coming out for the conversation tonight. Good to see you all, even by Zoom boxes. Be in person sometime.
Right. So hopefully one time in person very soon. All right. Thank you so much.